Good afternoon. My name is Diane Bostenjack, and I will be your host for today's meeting. My co-host will be Jeff Newman. We appreciate all of you taking your time to join us today. Just making sure I'm not on mute. Today's webinar will be a discussion with individuals who have built successful conservation and environmental biology careers in nonprofit, federal agency, and university settings. This is part of AIBS's monthly webinar series. For those of you who are less familiar with AIBS, we are a federation of both individual and professional biological science and research centers, expanding the breadth of biological sciences. We are both a membership organization as well as an organization that provides a number of fee-for-service programs ranging from peer review, scientific publishing, public policy, education, just a nice large variety. So we have a great, vibrant, and diverse community. Just to touch base a little bit about this webinar, though, just a quick reminder regarding this. It is going to be recorded for archival purposes, so you will be receiving an email at the end of this webinar, probably within the 24 hours, on how to access that if you'd like to watch it again. If you have any questions or issues, please use the chat feature below, and someone from AIBS, either myself or Jeff, will assist you. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the call, at the end of the presentations, I'm sorry. To ask a question, please type your question into the Q&A feature, and someone, either myself, Jeff Newman, or Julie Polakovich-Carr, who's also on this, is one of our panelists, will relay your question to the presenters. Thank you again, everyone, for joining today's webinar. We're really excited, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mary Klein.
Hi, everybody. I'm your facilitator today. It's Mary Klein. I'm a member of the board of directors of AIBS. And it is a wonderful organization. If you don't know much about it, just joining this webinar, I encourage you to check out their website and learn more about AIBS and their work. Today we are going to be talking about conservation biology careers and conservation science. It's a relatively new discipline, but it has been around for a little over 30 years. The Society for Conservation Biology, which was formed in 1985, was sort of the launch pad for this whole discipline. And Society of Conservation Biology is a member of AIBS, so we're really thrilled about that. What we're going to do today is have our panelists talk about some different variety of careers that they have followed in this space. There's really been a proliferation of opportunities. You can now get involved in the conservation space and everything from foundational research on biogeographic studies or biodiversity research to ecological restoration, recovery of species, and conservation of human managed lands, particularly the intersection of agricultural activities and conservation issues. And a really exploding area these days is the more social aspects of conservation, being able to do research into how to connect people better with nature, help them understand ecological principles, and even dealing with some specific human-caused threats like trafficking in endangered species or poaching and things like that. And of course, the intersection with climate change and conservation issues is a huge area of study now. Each one of our panelists represents a different take on a career path in this conservation biology space. And so we're going to let each one talk to you briefly about their experiences and then answer your questions. So our first panelist is Lindsay Wise. She's with the Oregon Biodiversity Information Center at the Institute of Natural Resources at Oregon State University. She works on a variety of projects, including managing information about the status and distribution of species, a geodatabase of Oregon's protected areas, creating and maintaining ecological data sets, and organizing transfers and sharing of information for the state of Oregon. She also acts as the data administrator for the Oregon IMAP invasive site, which is a particularly interesting site for people interested in invasive species. Both natural resource managers, land managers, and interested citizens can participate in IMAP invasives by recording observations of invasive species and management actions that are taken to help control them. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lindsay to tell us a little bit about her career.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction, Mary. So my name is Lindsay Wise, and I'm actually stationed at Portland State University. We also have a sister office in Oregon State University, so we are a dual university institute. And I've been here for about almost 10 years now. But I started out as a field biologist. I went to undergrad in biology. I was also always interested in conservation biology and wanted to learn more about species and ecosystems. And so my undergrad, I went for a biology degree at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington, which is a small liberal arts college. And I had planned to go to a big state school, UC Davis, but that turned out to be too expensive, and I got a scholarship to UPS. But it actually turned out for the better for me, I think. Being at a small liberal arts university, I got to take poetry and Russian lit along with all my science classes, which I really enjoyed. And the class sizes were really small, and the professors were very dedicated and available for us students. So I was able to get a really good education there. Introduction to biology, it was a general biology degree, but I did have some field botany courses, ecology courses, and got some really good mentors there. And two things that really stood out about that at UPS was that I was able to study abroad for a term at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. And I also did a senior thesis project at Mount Rainier National Park, where I studied an alpine plant community. So I learned some field botany skills there, put that to work. Also learned how to collect information in the field, do ordination analyses, report writing, thesis writing, and all of that. So it was a really good academic experience from that. So after my undergraduate, I decided to do a graduate degree. Since I had a general biology degree, I wanted to get a little bit more into the ecology and the field botany side of things. And one of the other motivators was that I wanted to get back to Scotland, and being a student is a good way to do that. The University of Aberdeen, where I studied abroad, has a master's ecology program, so I applied to that. Not only was I able to get back to Scotland, but it was also a one-year program, which also appealed to me. I didn't feel like going back to school for too many more years. So I was able to go back to Scotland, learned a lot there, got a lot more ecology and natural resource management experience in Scotland, got my degree, and then came back and started looking for work in the States. Started out looking for field tech positions, seasonal positions as a start, and it took a little while, did some temp jobs, kept applying to positions, and was able to get a position at Mount Rainier National Park. So my senior thesis project led directly to my first biology job. So I worked there for 3 seasons doing field botany, plant surveys, entering field notes into databases. It was a great experience, although with seasonal work, you're off in the winters, and that got to be a little hard. So after a couple seasons there, I decided I wanted to look for more permanent work. Before I left, though, I became interested in the data management side of things. You go out in the field, you collect a bunch of data, and then you come back to the office and you enter it into databases. And I was wondering what happens to that data next. Like as a field tech, you don't really see the analysis side or the reporting side. And so I really got interested in that. And my supervisor gave me the leeway to to learn some of that on my own. So I started off just with the how to use MS Access disks at home. Went through those, and then my supervisor needed a small database built for her, and she gave me the opportunity to try to put that together for her, which I was able to do. So that's how I started getting into the database side of natural resource management. And so while I was looking for full-time jobs back in Portland, I went to a job fair at Portland State University, and the Nature Conservancy had a booth there, and they were offering AmeriCorps positions for a year. AmeriCorps is a volunteer position, but you do get a living stipend and an education award at the end. And the position was exactly what I wanted to do. It was with the Oregon Biodiversity Information Center, which works with managing rare species data and using that information to make decisions and to rank species. And so even though it was a volunteer position, and I was moving in with some friends, and so I figured I could make that work, and I took the job. And it was an amazing experience. It was exactly what I wanted to do. And at the end of it, I was lucky enough that they were able to hire me on, and I have been there ever since. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. I think her experience is a great demonstration. I also, I'll admit, came up through the Natural Heritage Network and the information management side, and it can be really rewarding. I think some people don't realize before they get into it how enjoyable it is to help keep track of the at-risk species and how empowering it is to be able to share that information with other people to make good decisions. So our next panelist is Rocco Cena. Rocco serves as the Conservation Coordinator for the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, also known as SFI, which is the largest, well, it's a nonprofit that oversees the largest forest certification standard in North America. Rocco's focus includes strengthening relationships with conservation organizations and universities and administering SFI's Conservation Grant Program. His other experience includes fire ecology research with the U.S. Forest Service and freshwater ecosystem assessments, working with a consulting firm. He's the chair-elect of the national chapter of the Society of American Foresters, where he's responsible for strategic direction. So welcome, Rocco, and tell us a little bit about your career path.
Sure. So let me start off by saying thank you for introducing me here, Mary, and thank you to everyone at the American Institute of Biological Sciences for putting this on. I think it's really great. You know, and also thank you to Lindsay. A lot of what you said reminds me of my own career, and so it was exciting to hear that. You know, to everyone that joined, it's exciting to be here with you. I feel like probably many of you are either in school now or you're seeking a career pivot, and I found that I myself wasn't, I haven't been out of that area or that space for very long. Actually, in fact, I'm in school right now, and so I'm deeply embedded in that same type of space. So as Mary mentioned, my career position is with the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. We're a nonprofit that's dedicated to increasing sustainable management on working forests and conservation on working forests. And like Mary mentioned, we manage a forest certification standard, but we do a lot more than just that. And I've been there for about 4 years now, and I graduated with a bachelor's 5 years ago, so I guess I should start there. 5 years ago, I was at Humboldt State University finishing up a Bachelor of Science degree in environmental science, you know, and so I didn't even necessarily think that I'd become a conservation professional. Actually, at the time, I thought I'd probably become more of a restoration type professional, which is not necessarily completely different than conservation, but I'm certainly not a conservation biologist in that sense. You know, and I was very fortunate. A lot of opportunities opened themselves up to me while I was working on my bachelor's. I ended up having the chance to work on fire ecology research with the U.S. Forest Service. I also did a little bit of soil science research working through or with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And so this kind of takes me back to pre-webinar. Someone who may or may not be attending today asked the question, you know, what advice do you have for opportunities to take when you're trying to get into a career in conservation biology? For me, I would say one of the most important things you can do is look for the chance to take on professional opportunities while you're still in school, or to take on volunteer positions if you need to, or internships. And sometimes those aren't always the most appealing opportunity. Maybe you want to live at home and work somewhere closer, or work in an area you want to. For me, working for the Forest Service and doing fire ecology meant living in the woods in a barracks for 5 months out of the year. And so that was a sacrifice on my part, but it's paid off in spades as I pivoted out of my undergraduate and into my role at SFI. So that's, I guess, my first piece of advice, is to look for those opportunities, and sometimes you have to make a sacrifice, but they may pay off in the end. Which kind of brings me to what happened after I got out of school. So I got out of school, like I said, I had worked with the U.S. Forest Service and with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, but not to make excuses, but as you may know, 5 years ago, many people weren't hiring as much, especially the federal government. And so I was not able to find any positions with the government. I was studying there in Northern California, and I moved back to Arlington, Virginia, which is where my family is from and where I'm originally from, and started looking for anything I could. And that took me down the path of a few different internships, ending at the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, where they took me on as an intern. When I got there, one of the things that I quickly learned is that the things you learn in school are extremely helpful from a technical standpoint, but you don't have all of the professional skills necessarily in place. And so there was a steep learning curve in terms of the way you interact in the professional world of conservation work, what that type of writing and business correspondences are like. But what I did is I sort of just dived in and looked to add value anywhere I could. And I did a bunch of different things at SFI. I actually started working more on policy and quickly found out that I was better suited to conservation type work. And for me, that's administering and managing conservation grants. The Sustainable Forestry Initiative has a $400,000 a year grant program. And I found that managing those grants and working with the different grantees to help add value and to help guide their really great and high quality work has been very fulfilling to me. And it allows me to not be as much a scientist myself, but to be more a relationship builder and to create bridges between different organizations and SFI to sort of leverage that work across the large landscape that SFI works in. So I guess this is all history now, because through trying my very best and being fortunate to be there at the right time, SFI was able to offer me a full-time position, and so that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years. And again, I guess that takes me back to my first point. You never know where an internship might lead you, so try to take those opportunities, and when you get them, work your very hardest, and things can work out that way for you like they did for me. Now that I've been at SFI for a few years, I wanted to do more strategically speaking, and I wanted to gain a bit more leadership skills, because like I said, I don't think that I'm ever going to be a research scientist. I more want to be a relationship builder, and I think that building relationships and learning how to communicate our work is such a critically important part of the conservation story, and it's something that's frequently not given as much attention by research scientists, which inspired me to look towards gaining some leadership skills through a master's program. There's a wide range of different types of programs you can do. I wanted to continue working full-time at SFI, and so I ended up selecting Virginia Tech's Executive Masters of Natural Resource Program. It's a program that allows me to work full-time and go to school full-time. And it's, I would say, about half science type work and half leadership and communication skills type work, which to me has been infinitely helpful because my entire career has been more about science. And so learning how to communicate the message to a wide range of audiences, I think is really important, something we can't overlook as we try to dive into the field of conservation biology or other scientific endeavors. So, you know, there's no right or wrong way to pursue higher education, but for me, it was also very helpful to have a little bit of professional work under my belt before selecting a program like that, because it's allowed me to better focus what my studies are and to really get the most out of my program, because I know what I need at this point, or at least I know better what I need and what I'm interested in and where my weaknesses are and where my skills are. The last thing I'd like to leave you with, and Mary had mentioned, is I very quickly, when I moved back to Northern Virginia, I joined the Society of American Foresters. And I found that being in a professional society, whether that's joining something like the Society of American Foresters or even getting involved with a group like the American Institute of Biological Sciences, finding your group of professionals to work with and not just network with, but to build real relationships and friendships with has been infinitely helpful for me. And depending on how interested you get into working with these different professional groups, you can rise up through the ranks and really gain a lot of value and a lot of experience from that. And that's exactly what I've done. And I am the chair-elect of that group. I was elected in to lead the group. And I just can't say enough how valuable it's been for me to join a professional society and get to work with a lot of people who have a lot more experience and who have offered me really valuable mentorship opportunities. So with that, I think I'll pass it back to you, Mary. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rocco. Really appreciate that. And our last panelist is Gabriela Chavarria, known to her friends as Gabby. Dr. Chavarria is a forensic science branch chief at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Forensic Laboratory. I think this is really cool and exciting work. It's a unique wildlife crime laboratory that supports law enforcement investigations of wildlife violations at the federal, state, and international levels. But prior to working there, Gabby has had an incredible career. She served as the science advisor to the Director of Fish and Wildlife Service, as the Director of Natural Resources, Director of the Natural Resources Defense Council's Science Center, Vice President for Science at the International Conservation at Defenders of Wildlife, and Policy Director for Wildlife Conservation at the National Wildlife Federation. So she's worked at pretty much all of the big conservation organizations and nonprofits in the United States, as well as pretty major roles within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She also serves on a number of boards and advisory councils at the state, federal, and private level. She was born and raised in Mexico City, but is now been with us in the United States for a long time. Welcome, Gabby, and tell us a little bit about your career.
Thank you, Mary, for the invitation. And, you know, I've been a big fan of the American Institute for Biological Sciences for a long time. And I always enjoy reviewing and reading my bioscience magazine. I think it's just a great, great tool since I was a student. So, and it's just, you know, a pleasure to be, you know, part of this panel with Lindsay and Rocco. So I'm really, really excited. I wish that, you know, when I was like trying to decide my career path, we had more of these kinds of webinars where, you know, you get to hear what others' careers have been. But as Mary said, I'm originally from Mexico, and I did my undergraduate degree in Mexico in biology. I've always loved bees, so some of you that know me, I see some familiar names on the chat. Some of you that know me, I'm a passionate lover of bees, particularly bumblebees. So I did my undergraduate degree in biology, focused on Africanized honeybees. And then I had the great pleasure of coming to Harvard to work with E.O. Wilson to do my PhD on bumblebees. And, you know, and some of you that are in school, one of the things that, you know, I learned along the way as I was in school, and because I had great mentors in other graduate students and postdoctoral fellows, was develop a network early on in your career, because you never know who those people are going to end up, and they're going to be there for you to give you a hand later on in your life. Also, if you're in school and you're just so focused on your, you know, getting a degree in biology or chemistry or whatever science that you are picking, make sure that you also incorporate a lot of classes in communications, writing. I was fortunate enough that, you know, my advisor was very big into grant writing. So he actually sent us to a lot of the different resources across campus to find out about grants and potential opportunities. And I ended up, you know, in 2 classes on fundraising, you know, and I always was like, what is this for? But I'm here to tell you that later on in life, even your work, you have to be a salesman for what you do and, you know, to really find those opportunities later. So when I finished my PhD, which I love, and hearing Rocco saying that he's still in school, I'm so jealous, because I wish I were back in school. I can easily go back and do another PhD exactly the same way I did it, because it was just amazing. But of course, I'm older now, so I don't think it look good for me to go back to school and get another PhD. So, but one of the things that, as I was finishing my PhD, I realized that as much as I love what I did a thesis on the taxonomic biogeography of the neotropical bumblebees. I didn't feel that my thesis, even though it was like really heavy core science, did anything for bumblebees. So when I came out of school, I was trying to figure it out, how could I help bumblebees? And one of the things that I really started to look into was, looking at a lot of those, job ads and a lot of those eco guides that a lot of universities have on books about careers, about positions, about field work. And in reading those descriptions, that kind of like sparked my interest in saying, well, maybe I don't have the skills here, but I have, a little bit of these other skills. And I actually ended up working as an intern because, as Rocco said, internships, and if you can afford doing volunteer work for a little while, that really opens a lot of doors, because you're basically showing people your willingness to do things, to show how much you know, how hard can you work, and for very little, but the experience that you gain is just really, really wonderful. So I started working as an intern because I started applying for these big positions at the Nature Conservancy, the World Wildlife Fund, and the National Wildlife Federation. I said, oh my God, I have a PhD from Harvard. Of course they're going to hire me. Well, I had no experience. How are they going to hire me? So that's when somebody said to me, you're going to have to volunteer and, create and build your network and start building your own path. So I started working as an intern for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, which was one of the most incredible opportunities I had, because at that point I had made the decision, or let's say my ex-husband made the decision, that I was going to stay in the United States. So in working for the foundation, I decided that I was going to learn everything about the conservation needs of the United States. And the foundation gave me that opportunity. So I started as an intern, and then a month later, they hired me as a program officer, and I was with them for over 6 years, and creating and developing programs along the way, and using, the science that I had, and my network of people across universities and NGOs, to bring them together. So it was a lot of fun, but it was great. But I still was looking for something more about, making a difference. And even though I created programs to protect the species, even to protect bees, I wanted to make a bigger impact. And that's when I continue my search, into the job descriptions. And still today, I go back and look at a lot of job ads in conservation to see if what I'm doing now, is very fulfilling, half fulfilling. The activities that I do on a daily basis, is that really, what I want to do? And I do this every year. Sometimes I look at it like, yeah, my God, I'm the vice president of conservation policy for whatever. But, of the 100% of my time, I spend 90% doing management and 10% doing fun stuff. So then you realize that you have to start making changes on the things that you're doing. But looking at job ads and all of those different career paths that are now available, you realize the kinds of things you want to do, including, I want to do field work, or do you want to sit behind a desk and do work behind a desk? So that's, one of those things that, you just start learning along the way. And, what Mary said, I was a science advisor to Director Dan Ash. when I came to the Fish and Wildlife Service working for the government, because that was kind of like my big next step. Okay, I've done the foundation, I've done the NGOs, now I'm going for the federal government. And it was really a thrilling experience being in the director's corridor for 3 years. I learned so much. But, the stress level of those positions, the intensity, the travel gets to you. And then, in reading again into my job descriptions, I realized that I was not doing, a lot of the stuff that it was fulfilling for me. So I started looking again because I wanted to go back to science. After all, I was trained as a scientist. And that's how I came to be at the forensics laboratory, where, Mary already said what we do. And it's just being great to be back to do analytical and scientific work on a daily basis for a good cause. And for something that, I see the impact, when our cases make it to the justice system. So it's been a really good career, very diverse, as you can see. But along the way, you're gaining tools, you're developing a network, and, and you're knocking on doors. So don't be shy. You have to knock on doors to find those opportunities. So thank you, Mary.
You're welcome. Thank you, Gabby. And thanks to all of our panelists. I think Diane and Jeff, we probably have plenty of questions from the chat and Q&A. So please go ahead and help us get started, and we'll see if those questions take us through the end.
You got it. All right. So I have one from Katie. Do you have any advice on how to find internships/volunteer opportunities?
This is Rocco. I have some thoughts on that from how it worked out for me. You can spend, one thing I would say is, for me, LinkedIn has been very helpful, and you can find a lot of opportunities through LinkedIn. You can also use LinkedIn as part of your web presence. And for folks further along in their career, having a strong web presence may not be as possible because you've already built up that respect through your portfolio of work throughout your career. But for folks early on in their career, people like me, I find having a web presence is important. I'm not very active on Twitter, but I'm on there. My LinkedIn page is very dialed in to show what I want people to see. I put blogs out there. So that's only one aspect of getting internships, but having a presence that people can see, and when they look you up, they're excited in you, because once you find internships, you need to get those people to actually hire you, which might be the harder part than finding them. And the other thing I would add is make your connections while you're at school, or make connections anywhere you can, because you never know when those people might be able to offer you an opportunity. There's lots of different emailing chains where people will send out internships or opportunities for you that your professors can help you find, or that other professionals can help you find. And if you have any contacts at all in the field, reach out to them as well. I actually, I've had 3 internships. 2 of them I happened to find through the internet, searching for them. My internship at SFI, a family friend knew someone at SFI and showed me the opportunity, and I applied for it, and I was able to obtain it through applying for it. It wasn't just because I had that friend, but you never know when a family connection or another professional connection you've made can help you unless you ask.
I would just add that you can also look at the traditional job fairs, which is where I found my internship. Also, jobs are often announced via Listserv, so you can find either subject-based or geographic-based listservs, and people will send those around through email. Or if you have specific organizations that you really want to work with, you can reach out to them directly and ask if they have openings or if they plan to have openings.
And making a pledge for the government, Mary, before you interrupt me, usajobs.gov, even though everybody thinks it's a very unfriendly website, it has a lot of really great information. And it actually has a big section for internships and temporary work within the federal government. There's a section there, you just have to look very in-depth in there, but it will give you a whole array of different opportunities if you want to do field work for any of the federal agencies that manage land and natural resources, or if you want to stay in Washington, D.C. and do work in policy, the arena. So I will encourage you to look into usajobs.gov.
Hi, everyone. Julie Polakovich-Carr with AIBS. I also just wanted to put a plug in for the listserv EcoLog. It's run by the Ecological Society of America, which is one of AIBS's member societies. But that is a great resource for finding internships, volunteer positions, as well as full-time paid positions. I'd say daily they're listing probably a dozen or more jobs through that listserv. Again, it's called EcoLog.
Great. Another question?
Sure. If we've already taken multiple unpaid internships that did not evolve into jobs and are now out of school and in desperate need for something paid, sorry, I keep jumping down. What do you recommend? Would it be better to take more unpaid internships in addition to another irrelevant paying job, or better to search for a paid job in the conservation ecology field?
I mean, if you are willing to go into the federal government, like I was saying, there's a lot of temporary positions, 1 year, 6 months, up to like 2-year temporary position that will, help you to continue network, help you gaining tools. And, or even if you are already doing an internship within the organization that you're interested, ask them if there are other opportunities there, even if it's not the perfect job. You can at least be willing to do other things within that organization. And then eventually when they have an opening for the kind of skills you have, you already gain more skills, but you're also already inside that organization.
I have heard of people taking jobs with an agency in a geographic location that wasn't ideal for them, but that was their way to get in the door and get into the agency. And then later you can transfer to a site that you're more interested in.
And I'd like to add to that. I think what probably becomes a really limiting factor is ability to move, because there are a lot of opportunities. I suspect if you were able to move, that being able to look at websites like EcoLog or Indeed or Society of Conservation Biology posts jobs on their website, or individual organizations, there's quite a bit available. It just might not be in a specific geographic area. So I think early career, being willing to move. In my career, one of the things I had to do was move to different states a couple of times as I was building my career. And I took paid jobs, but they weren't all in the same place.
All right, great. Let's go with another question. What recommendations do you have for someone at the end of their doctoral degree that has not had the opportunity to do such internships and et cetera, and has been trained to be a research scientist but wants to get more into resource management and conservation? How does one compete with others who have professional training and have experience for jobs of this nature?
Okay, I'll jump in. Well, internships is a good thing. Volunteering is another thing if you are, if you're willing to and you can afford to do some volunteer work. I mean, like I said before, I had no experience, in the conservation field, coming out of my PhD. But even just doing, helping some of your fellow graduate students do some of their work, or the postdoctoral fellows, you're gaining experience, and you can claim that as, as an activity that you're doing outside of your specific PhD. And then if you can find, careers where, in the summertime, you can, do temporary work or help an analyst outside of your field, that also will help you in, gaining brownie points as you're applying for positions.
I do think that the field is competitive enough that working to gain some of that experience is going to be important to land the conservation job. And it may be that you take another job that's more research oriented in the time being, But then I would recommend joining local societies. I think that's probably a fantastic suggestion by Rocco. I know I joined like the Wildlife Society and was very active in the local chapter early in my career. And you don't have to have a job in that field to be able to join the society and participate in what they're doing. So, you know, there's ways you do have to build those connections and build that experience, but maybe do it through personal activities on the side to get started.
Great. Here's another question. Is grad school crucial to finding a career?
This is Rocco. No, I don't think that it is at all. It depends on what you want to do. I think that nowadays more than ever, and you've probably heard this before, I've heard it from a bunch of people, having a master's is like the new bachelor's. But I don't think that that's entirely true. I think that you know, I think that it's very helpful to get a master's degree in today's market. And so it's something you should consider. I also think, though, that you kind of have two paths there. You can jump right in after school, and that might help you get a position because you have one. Or you might kind of end up like Gabriela, where you've got this huge wealth of academic experience, but you don't have professional experience, and it's still going to be a little bit tough to break in. The other way you can do it is you can do what I did, and is try to get a professional job and then learn a bit more about yourself and what you need to progress and what you like, and then go to graduate school from there. So I guess that's a bit more than what you had asked. I don't think that it's necessary, but it's something to very highly consider and something that will really enrich your life in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and if you are in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, there's a graduate school that they call it, continuing education, which is like evening classes with some of the people that work in Washington, that in the evening they will teach 1 or 2 hours on different topics of, conservation, environment, all sorts of things. So you don't need a degree, but if you are continuing to try to educate on different areas that you're interested and linking with a lot of people that are actively working in those fields, that also helps you if you don't have a PhD or a master's. But that shows that you're up to date on, some of the issues that you're talking about.
Hey, this is Rocco again. I don't want to monopolize time here, but let me just add to that. I'm not sure if everyone on this group has access to my email, but you can easily look me up on the internet, and my email and my phone number is out there. I would be happy to talk with anyone offline about that. And I actually, on a very, very part-time basis, work with Virginia Tech, and would be very pleased to share with you the different opportunities that Virginia Tech has, but also to share the other schools that I looked into, because, just in the last year and a half, I was looking at a lot of different programs and have some more thoughts on that. So please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to chat.
I would just add that I don't think there's any reason to jump into a grad program for the sole purpose of getting a degree. You should really be interested in what you're doing and have more motivation than just getting it on your resume, because there are plenty of opportunities, if you look for them, that don't require a grad degree. And if you start off there, then you may, as others have said, figure out more of what you're looking for, and then you can always do grad school later. But it's a big time and money investment, and so it shouldn't be taken lightly.
Great. And just to let everybody know, all your questions, if we do not get to your question during the webinar, we will try to answer it afterwards. So don't worry if there's a lot of questions coming in. So I just want to make sure if you don't get to yours, don't worry. We're not going to forget about you. Let's see. What do the panelists recommend for a recent grad with widespread interests? How do you work to narrow down those interests in order to pursue a career in something more specific?
If you have a lot of interests, I guess you could start by looking at the opportunities that are near you. I would just say follow whatever opportunity you find interesting that's open first. And then if that turns out to be what you really want, you can follow that, or you can switch to something else. I wouldn't think that grad school would be the way to go yet if you still have such broad interests. I would just say look for what's available, try a few things out, and see if one of them stands out to you as what you'd like to pursue.
Yeah, nowadays, we have the great fortune that there's so many webinars, presentations online, or, at the NGOs, at the government, or universities. So that with that diversity and hearing all of those areas that you can potentially explore, and they're free, you can probably, narrow what your interests are.
I'll add, my experience was a little bit like some of the other panelists, but when I had finished my undergrad, I wasn't sure. I knew I wanted to go into conservation, but I thought I wanted to go into conservation education. So I got a environmental education position, held it for about 8 months, and realized during that time that it was not really what I wanted to do, and that I would go back to graduate school to study more wildlife biology, that doing the field research was something that was more interesting to me. So dabbling in whatever seems to be pulling you in that direction is a great idea. You're not making a lifetime commitment in your first couple of jobs. So, try out what looks interesting and see if it fits.
Sorry, I'm just fielding the questions, trying to bunch them together. Okay, so I'm going to bunch a couple of the questions together just so we can touch on all of the, a lot of people are mentioning, that everybody pretty much talked about how they did volunteer work and internships. What if you can't afford that? What suggestions do you have? Because not everybody has, or people that have actually done internships and volunteer, positions, but nothing has even, either they can't get it or they get it and nothing comes out of it. So if that's not an option, do you guys have any suggestions for maybe other ways to do it, to go around that?
Well, as Mary mentioned before, being able to move geographically will drastically improve expand your opportunities. If you're not able to do that and you've maybe exhausted internships in your location and you can't find anything, then, take a paying job. You have to pay the bills. So, it may be that you have to take a different position while you're still keeping your ears open for conservation opportunities. But, you have to do what fits best with your life.
I wouldn't consider that a failure in any way.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to keep yourself in the mix, in the game, but have some things. I really would encourage you to have at least one thing that you're doing on the side, volunteering for stewardship days at the local parks, or getting involved in a local association while you're doing the work that you've been able to find, as a way to be present when opportunities open up and have people think of you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and many organizations will be open, if they really see that you're interested, to come and volunteer 1 or 2 hours a week. Or sometimes, they have weekend mailings that they have to do to Congress or things like that. So when they see your willingness, and you're open to do those kinds of things, it's totally fine. I mean, it's a welcome addition.
So some of you guys mentioned, listservs and stuff like that. And a couple people did ask, how do you get invited to, how do you get invited to serve on, to get on, how do you get in those listservs? How do you find those listservs?
Google searches, talking to colleagues, people that that are in the conservation field, just ask them what listservs they're on, which ones they find most interesting. Universities also often have them, or nonprofits. So ask people personally, and look online. You'll find them.
And many conservation societies have also those listservs. And the bioscience has a really good add at the end. I don't know how much. I'm sure they do a lot for students. So if you join a lot of these societies, you know, it's really worth it on the long run.
Another thing is that some places have like happy hours. Like here in Portland, there's a GIS happy hour every month that you just hear of through word of mouth. So, you know, it's just asking people, you know, are there meetups? Are there casual things or more formal societies? And just ask around and see what active groups there are and what you can become a part of.
This is Rocco. I'd like to add too, this isn't exactly what the question is, but when it comes to people struggling with unpaid internships and you know, needing to find an opportunity that pays the bills while still trying to stay in the field of conservation, one thing that I think is important to remember is that it's very easy to be idealistic about conservation, but conservation, you know, unlike making Apple computers, doesn't really make a lot of money. It can be a profitable career, but we don't generate something that we sell. And so that's one of the reasons funding is so highly limited for these type of positions. And so I would encourage you to expand your view of what you think of as conservation. Like, for instance, it's easy to try to look up the Nature Conservancy or the Worldwide Fund for Nature or other NGOs, and it's awesome to land one of those jobs. And, so I encourage you to keep trying to do it. But actually, in some ways, going to work for Coca-Cola or working for Walmart, which is something that I, at least early on in my career, would have never thought about at all. And in fact, just to reveal my own philosophy, I would have thought that those companies are doing bad things. But I would just encourage you to expand what you think of as a conservation job, because a lot of organizations are interested in sustainability and trying to work to do good things around the world, and many corporations are. And so finding a job with someone that you might not be looking for right now might be the way to go. And it's not copping out or leaving the field. It's just approaching the impacts that we all need to have from a different angle.
That's a very good point. You know, British Petroleum has biodiversity jobs, and many of the like pipeline companies and power companies have to go out and do surveys and do their due diligence. So there are conservation jobs in the private industry and in the energy sector for sure. So it's not all about federal agencies and nonprofits.
Are there any emerging skill sets from your respective paths in conservation that you would encourage early career professionals to explore?
Well, from the data management side, we always have trouble finding people who know what relational databases are or why they are important. So if you're interested in data, I started learning that from an online course through my local community college. Just learning what is a relational database, and how do you build them, how do you design a good structure for maintaining large, diverse sets of data. That's a very specific example, but that's one that in our office we often find lacking in people that apply.
And on that same point, it's ironic that I'm saying it because my camera is not working for this webinar, but just being good with technology in general is really, really helpful for a lot of places now. You'll find that there's a lot of people who are older professionals who are so extremely skilled at strategy and extremely skilled at the work they do, but they need some help on the IT side, and just being able to help with that, it can be, you know, pretty important, whether that's GIS or database stuff or even just installing Windows 10 on their computer. I wouldn't discount, you know, for a lot of young people, the technology comes kind of easy. So just be aware of that as one of the potential skills.
One of the things that we always look for in our applicants is how they would solve a problem if their supervisor wasn't around. So being able to seek out your own solutions, even if it's just a Google search. And that's a lot of times where we start when we have a technological problem, or like, how do I do this in ArcGIS? Just having those research skills of being able to look things up on your own, or knowing who to ask. You know, have a friend so that you could ask, or a colleague. it's being able to demonstrate that you can do some research on your own, some problem solving.
Going back to some things that were said earlier too, I think good writing skills are really critical, good communication skills, and drawing on a point that Rocco was making about going back for his master's degree, good interpersonal skills. One of the jokes in our field is that people go into conservation biology because they prefer the company of plants and animals to the company of people. You hear that a lot. But in fact, being in the conservation biology field is very interdisciplinary. There's a lot of teamwork. There's a lot of need to be able to work well with a diversity of people who have different skill sets, bringing those together to solve big conservation challenges. And so being able to demonstrate facilitation skills, writing, communicating, being able to give a presentation and communicate ideas are really good supplementary skills for the scientific skills.
Mary, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I have to say, when I was working on my undergraduate, I think that you may get a false, this is my own perspective, so maybe not everyone would agree with this, but you get a false sense of the level of perfection in writing and in correspondences that is required for the professional world. And I find that for me, it was learning to write creatively well wasn't too much of a challenge, but being able to perfect your writing technically and having zero typos. You know, if you're writing a press release, or and this kind of gets back to what Lindsay said too, is what would you do if your boss wasn't around? I think that kind of being very keenly aware and attentive to details and perfecting those type of skills, whether it's an email, talking with someone, or writing something, is really, really important. Especially when you're an intern. If you're an intern and they give you an opportunity to write a report, and you may have done the best research in the world, but if you've got a typo in the front line, if you've got a boss that doesn't like that, it's going to reflect very poorly on you. And so that might seem silly, but it's something, just to add to Mary's point, I think that's a really good thing to be aware of.
All right, great.
That's the time. Yeah.
So, Mary, do you have anything to say before I do the closing? Or
I just want to thank everyone who joined us out there in webinar land. I'm so sorry that we can't see all of you and get to know a little bit more about you, but we really appreciate your participation, and I certainly hope that this was useful to people. As Rocco said, we are all anxious to help continue to respond to people's questions. So we will be responding to the questions that we haven't been able to get to in the webinar. And you can find us out there and reach out, or either through AIBS or directly, to get more connections. Start your networking now.
Great, thanks, Mary. Again, thank you for everyone for joining today's webinar. Please visit our website to watch recordings of this webinar and past webinars in our series at aibs.org. We'd like to thank all our individual and organizational members for their support. Without them, we would not be able to provide these informative webinars. If you are not a member of AIBS, please join us today by, again, going to our website, aibs.org. Enjoy the benefits of an AIBS membership and help bring biology to life. We look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.